He thought bringing his ex-wife to his wedding would break her pride. But the moment she walked in, the hall fell silent in disbelief. The envelope came on a quiet Thursday morning, addressed in a handwriting that Naomi Carter could never mistake. Inside lay an elegant ivory invitation, embossed with golden letters, the wedding of Daniel Reynolds and Claire Whitmore. At the bottom, a handwritten note carried a sting sharper than any blade. I thought you might like to see how a real wedding is done. I hope you'll attend. It will be instructive. Naomi stared at the words, her pulse quickening. At 33, she thought she had already survived the worst storms of her life. But this was Daniel's cruelty dressed in expensive stationery. 6 years of marriage had ended not because of irreconcilable differences, but because he had grown ashamed of introducing her, a black journalist from a modest background, to his polished world of corporate lawyers, judges, and polished soirees. Now he wanted her front row to witness his upgrade, a blonde attorney, daughter of a federal judge, perfect for his ambition. Their separation had not only broken her heart, it had been a slow demolition of her self-worth. Daniel had ensured she was cut off from mutual friends, whispering poisonous tales about how she didn't fit in. He never said the words directly, but every gesture, every carefully veiled joke made her feel invisible in his world. He thrived on reminding her she was out of place. 3 years later, as Naomi held the invitation, a different kind of smile touched her lips. Daniel had no clue who she had become since he abandoned her. In the first months after divorce, she'd sunk into survival mode, renting a cramped apartment, writing filler articles for a neighborhood newspaper, avoiding any event where she might cross his shadow. But everything changed when a small assignment landed on her desk. An investigation into irregularities in city tenders. What began as a cautious project exploded into a national scandal when Naomi exposed corruption that shook the municipal government. Overnight, she transformed from tabloid journalist into one of the country's most respected investigative reporters. She had built networks in police departments, regulatory agencies, and even among prosecutors. People trusted her integrity and began feeding her information. What Daniel didn't know was that those whispers led straight to him. His name surfaced again and again, hidden behind shell companies, luxury dinners, and suspicious contracts. Naomi already had a mountain of evidence that he masterminded a multi-million-dollar fraud in public works. His invitation wasn't a humiliation, it was a stage, and she intended to use it. She placed the card gently on the table and opened her laptop. Her email to her editor was short but decisive. Special assignment, available for Saturday. As her fingers hit the keys, her eyes gleamed with the fire that always preceded her most explosive stories. Daniel wanted her present as a diminished ex-wife. Instead, she would arrive as the harbinger of his downfall. Memories of his calculated cruelty flooded back. At office dinners, he'd introduce her with a dismissive, "my journalist wife," as though her profession were a hobby. If anyone praised her work, he would change the subject or sneer about cheap ratings. The final straw had been that infamous Christmas party. Daniel had ignored her presence entirely, instead flattering Claire Whitmore with comments about women who really understand the legal world. Naomi had stood by, silent, burning, invisible. Now, years later, as she reread his venomous invitation, the shame had vanished. What remained was determination. For the past 18 months, Naomi had followed his trail. Police Chief Luis Alvarez, grateful for her earlier exposé that had saved his career, became a vital ally. Through him, she learned Daniel wasn't just bending rules. He was orchestrating a web of fraud with construction companies and councilmen. Every luxury he flaunted came from stolen taxpayer money. Ironically, even his wedding expenses, venue, catering, designer suit, were funded by embezzled millions. When she first pitched the investigation, her editor Marcus Vega had been cautious. "Naomi, you two have history. We can't let this look personal." Naomi had spread the files before him, photos, bank statements, recordings. When someone steals money meant for schools and hospitals, it stops being personal. It becomes public duty. Marcus's hesitation vanished after he heard Daniel on tape teaching a client how to bypass transparency rules. This could topple half the council, he admitted. Days later, Daniel's arrogance only confirmed her path. A smug WhatsApp message arrived. "Naomi, the invitation was a gesture of civility. Claire thought it would be elegant. I trust you won't show up inappropriately. You know how demanding such environments can be." Naomi screenshot it instantly. Every word of condescension would serve her later. Her reply was sharp and simple. "Don't worry, Daniel. I'll be dressed appropriately." By appropriately, she meant arriving with hidden recorders, a USB of 2 years' worth of evidence, and an ally stronger than Daniel could imagine. Federal Prosecutor Adrian Torres. Naomi and Adrian had met during an investigation into money laundering. Their connection deepened quickly, blending professional trust with undeniable chemistry. He had taught her what evidence could withstand courtroom scrutiny, and he had the authority to bring Daniel's empire crashing down. Together they pieced the puzzle. Fraudulent companies popping up to win contracts, inflated bills, offshore accounts, kickbacks disguised as consulting fees. More than $2.5 million had been siphoned, and Adrian had the court orders to prove it. The climax came when they traced direct transfers from shell companies to payments for Daniel's extravagant wedding. Naomi could hardly believe it. The man who prided himself on superiority was literally celebrating his perfect marriage with stolen funds. The plan crystallized. Naomi wouldn't just expose him in print, she would dismantle him in front of the very society he had used to belittle her. His wedding would become the stage of his greatest disgrace. The day arrived. A black Rolls-Royce stopped before the country club. Adrian stepped out first, tall, commanding, immaculate in a tailored tuxedo. Then he opened the door for Naomi. Gasps rippled across the porch as she emerged in a golden gown that shimmered under the afternoon light. No one saw a rejected ex-wife. They saw a woman transformed, radiant, untouchable. "Is that Naomi Carter?" a guest whispered, disbelief coloring the words. She walked with regal poise, Adrian's arms steady at hers, ignoring the whispers. Inside, Daniel greeted guests, smug and glowing. Then his eyes caught the commotion. His smirk froze, champagne glass trembling. "It can't be," he muttered, color draining from his face. Claire, dazzling in a gown worth thousands, followed his gaze. "Daniel, who is that?" she asked, though part of her already knew. His lips tightened. "My ex-wife." Naomi's smile was honey over knives. "Good afternoon, Daniel. Claire, you look exquisite. Congratulations." Adrian stepped forward, extending his hand. "Adrian Torres, federal prosecutor. A pleasure to meet you both." The word prosecutor landed like thunder. Daniel's grip on his glass faltered. Naomi reached into her purse and pulled an envelope. "I brought a wedding gift," she said sweetly. Inside were photos. Daniel meeting construction CEOs, days before multi-million-dollar tenders, accepting envelopes in parking lots, counting cash in his BMW. Claire's hands trembled as she flicked through them. "What is this?" she demanded. Naomi's phone played an audio file. Daniel's own voice boasting. The important thing is that the right companies win. Adjustments are normal. That's how business works here. Guests nearby fell silent, heads turning. Adrian produced a folder. Mr. Reynolds, this morning we opened a federal investigation into bid rigging. Your name is central. We have bank records linking $2.5 million in embezzled funds directly to these contracts. And, ironically, to tonight's expenses. Claire dropped the photos, horror spreading across her face. Daniel, tell me this isn't true. But Naomi wasn't finished. On her tablet, she showed detailed spreadsheets of transfers, proof of payments for catering, flowers, and music, all traced back to stolen public funds. Murmurs rose through the hall. He used money meant for schools and hospitals, Naomi announced, her voice carrying through the crowd. Daniel stammered, tried to shout about fabrications, but it was too late. Federal agents entered the hall. Cameras clicked. Guests whispered, some gasping, some shaking their heads. The proud groom, who had invited his ex-wife to humiliate her, was now being led out in handcuffs before his bride, his reputation, and his world crumbling. Naomi stood tall, her head high. She hadn't come as a victim. She came as justice itself. In that glittering hall, she wasn't invisible anymore. She was unforgettable.